To Emily, my beloved wife, I leave the sum of $50 American. The words of the lawyer, Mr. Henderson, echoed in the room like a slap across the face. My two sons, Michael and Daniel, exchanged looks of surprise that quickly transformed into mocking smiles. Linda, Michael's wife, was the first to let out a loud laugh that cut through the air like a knife. $50? Michael asked, unable to contain his laughter. Dad had a sense of humor until the very end. Daniel joined in the laughter, shaking his head while I remained seated in that leather chair, feeling the world collapsing beneath my feet. 45 years of marriage, 45 years of absolute dedication, and my husband had left me what was barely enough to buy groceries for a week. At least you can buy yourself something nice at the farmer's market, mother-in-law, Linda said with that poisonous smile she had perfected over the last few years. The room filled with murmurs and stifled giggles. Even the lawyer seemed uncomfortable with the situation, but he continued reading as if nothing had happened. To Michael, my eldest son, I leave the family house and 60% of the company's shares. Michael straightened up in his chair, his smile now wider. Linda squeezed his hand with satisfaction, as if she had won the lottery. To Daniel, my youngest son, I leave the remaining 40% of the company and all the rental properties. I sat there, with my wrinkled hands resting on the black handbag I had bought for my husband's funeral just a week ago, $50. After a lifetime of sacrificing myself for this family, after giving up my own dreams to build theirs, after caring for my husband during his long illness, that was all I was worth to him. Well, Mom, Michael said with a condescending smile, at least you won't have to worry about maintaining the house. Linda and I will take care of everything. The words sounded like a prison sentence. My own house, where I had raised my sons, where I had cooked thousands of dinners, where I had cried and laughed for decades, was no longer mine. But let me tell you how I reached this moment of humiliation, because this story began very differently. Just 2 years ago, I was Emily, a 69-year-old woman who believed she had a united family and a solid marriage. I lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, surrounded by a garden full of red roses that I cared for every morning as if they were my own daughters. My daily routine was simple, but it filled me with satisfaction. I woke up at 5 in the morning, brewed strong coffee just the way my husband liked it, and while he reviewed the daily newspapers, I organized the household activities. Sundays were sacred for our family. Michael would arrive with Linda, Daniel with his eternal good humor, and I would prepare a feast that lasted for hours. The Sunday pot roast was my absolute specialty. I marinated the meat from Saturday night with a secret recipe I had inherited from my mother. Everyone said it had the perfect seasoning, that nobody cooked like I did. Mom, your hands are magic, Daniel would tell me while stealing bits of meat directly from the roasting pan. Those were the moments that made me feel fulfilled, necessary, and loved. Michael had always been my more serious son, the one who inherited his father's meticulous temperament. He had been working in the family import business since he was 20, and I swelled with pride seeing him grow professionally. When he met Linda at a business conference, I thought destiny had sent him the perfect woman. She was elegant, educated, had a successful career in marketing, and seemed genuinely interested in being part of our family. The first few months with Linda were like a dream. She arrived at family gatherings with fresh flowers or pies from the best bakery downtown. She helped me in the kitchen, praised my recipes with enthusiasm, and even asked me to teach her how to make my famous homemade apple crumble. Mother-in-law, you cook like the angels in heaven, she would tell me while I showed her the exact consistency for the batter. Finally, I had the daughter I had always dreamed of having. Daniel, my youngest son, was like the sun in our family. Cheerful, spontaneous, he always had a funny anecdote to tell about his job as an engineer at a construction firm. He dreamed of having his own firm one day, and I knew he would achieve it because he had the determination and charisma necessary to succeed in anything he set his mind to. On weekends, Daniel accompanied me to the Central Market. He carried all my bags without me asking, bargained with the vendors to get me better prices, and we always ended the outing buying vanilla ice cream at the parlor where I took him when he was a child. "Mom, as long as you are here, I will be your personal chauffeur," he would say while driving my old car with a smile. Life felt perfect in those days. My husband successfully managed his company, which he had built from scratch during 30 years of tireless work. The boys had their professional paths well defined and seemed happy with their choices. I was the center that kept the whole family together, the one who organized every celebration, every gathering, every special moment that created memories for all of us. Every birthday, every holiday, every professional achievement was celebrated in my house, with my food, with my meticulous organization. I was the one who remembered the important dates, who bought the perfect gifts, who decorated every corner to create the ideal atmosphere. My house was the beating heart of our family, and I felt proud to be the guardian of those traditions we had built over decades. But perfect things have a treacherous habit of changing without warning, and the change arrived disguised as help and good intentions. It all began so subtly that at first I did not realize what was happening. Linda started arriving earlier on Sundays, ringing the doorbell when I had barely finished getting dressed. "I came to help you, dear mother-in-law," she said, with that radiant smile that had begun to seem too perfect to me. "I don't want you to get tired preparing everything alone." At first, I felt flattered by her concern. Finally, I had a daughter-in-law who valued my efforts and wanted to participate actively in family traditions. But little by little, that help began to transform into something completely different. Instead of assisting me, Linda started reorganizing my kitchen according to her own criteria. "Don't you think it would be more efficient to have the spices organized alphabetically?" she asked while moving my jars, breaking the system I had perfected over years. "And these knives would be better in this drawer, closer to the cutting board." My utensils, which I knew with my eyes closed, began to appear in unexpected places. Then came the suggestions about the ingredients. "Don't you think it would be healthier to use olive oil instead of butter?" she asked, with that sweet voice that had begun to sound condescending. I read in a nutrition magazine that saturated fats are very dangerous for people of our age. Our age? She was 32 years old. I had just turned 70. But Michael nodded fervently at every word that came out of her mouth, as if she were a prophet of modern cuisine. "Linda is right, Mom," my eldest son told me with a paternal smile that made me feel like a scolded child. "We should take better care of our health." She studied nutrition in college. That was a lie. Linda had studied marketing, but apparently now she was an expert on everything concerning my home. The criticism spread quickly to other aspects of my house. "This decoration has so much potential," she commented while examining my furniture with an expression of professional pity. "With some modern changes, this place would look absolutely spectacular. Don't you think these colors are a bit outdated?" My burgundy curtains, which I had chosen carefully 10 years ago, had suddenly become embarrassingly old-fashioned. My husband, who for 40 years had defended every one of my domestic decisions, began to listen to Linda's suggestions with growing interest. "The girl has very good taste," he told me when I protested in private. "It wouldn't be bad to renovate the house a little. We've had the same things for years. We've spent years building a home." I wanted to scream at him, but the words stayed trapped in my throat. The family Sundays began to transform dramatically. Instead of being gatherings where I was the natural hostess, they turned into sessions where Linda presented new ideas to improve absolutely everything I did. Michael supported her unconditionally in every suggestion, nodding like a devoted disciple. Daniel, who had always hated family conflicts, simply nodded to keep the peace, but I could see the discomfort in his eyes. One particularly painful Sunday, Linda arrived wearing an elegant green dress that made her look like a magazine model. Her attitude was completely different that day, more confident, more authoritative. Without asking my permission, she went directly to the head of the dining table, the place that had been mine for decades, and began to serve the food as if she were the absolute owner of the house. "Let me do it, mother-in-law," she said when I tried to stand up to fulfill my usual role. "You have already worked more than enough today." But there was something in her tone of voice that made my skin crawl. It was not respect or gratitude. It was a toxic mixture of pity and superiority that made me feel like a useless old woman in my own home. "Linda is right," Michael intervened immediately, as if he had been waiting for that moment. "Mom, it is time for you to relax a little. We can take care of these things." The word "we" resonated in my ears like an alarm bell. Since when were Linda and Michael "we" in my house? That night, I had the first serious argument with my husband in more than 20 years. "Linda only wants to help you," he told me while getting undressed with tired movements. "I don't understand why it bothers you so much that someone wants to make your life easier, but I understood perfectly what was happening. I could feel with every fiber of my being that my place in the family was beginning to wobble without me being able to do absolutely anything to stop that avalanche. It is not help," I explained to him with a trembling voice. "It is an invasion. She is taking control of my kitchen, of my table, of my traditions, and you are letting her do it." My husband looked at me with that expression of forced patience he reserved for when he considered I was being irrational. "You are exaggerating, Emily," he told me with a sigh. "Linda is part of the family now. It is natural that she wants to participate. But participating and taking over are two completely different things, and I knew he refused to see the distinction because it was more comfortable for him to ignore the problem. The following weeks were like watching my own life in slow motion while someone else took control of the script. Linda began to arrive not only on Sundays but also during the week, always with some perfectly reasonable excuse. She passed by here after work and thought about saying hello, she said. But then she stayed until very late reorganizing something or suggesting changes. Michael started visiting us more frequently too, but he no longer came to see me. He came to discuss plans with Linda, to review furniture catalogs, to measure spaces for possible renovations. I had become a ghost in my own house, present but invisible, necessary but ignored. The transformation of my home was so gradual that at first I thought maybe I was imagining things. But when I woke up one morning and found Linda reorganizing my pantry without even asking my permission, I knew she had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. "Good morning, mother-in-law." She greeted me with that smile I had already learned to fear. "I was seeing that you have many expired things here." I decided to do a general cleaning. My homemade preserves, which I had prepared with so much love during the autumn, were piled up in a trash bag. "These jams are more than 6 months old," she explained as if she were a health inspector. "It is dangerous to consume such old food at our age." Our age. Again that phrase that made me feel as if we were contemporaries, as if she had the right to make decisions about my health and my house. "Those jams are perfectly fine," I protested weakly, but my voice sounded pathetic even to myself. I made them following my grandmother's recipe, with the exact amount of sugar to preserve them for years. Linda looked at me with that expression of exaggerated patience used with small children or confused elderly people. "Dear mother-in-law, times have changed. Now we know much more about food safety," she explained to me while continuing to throw away my things. "Michael asked me to look after his health because he is very worried about you." The lie came out of her lips so naturally that for a moment I doubted my own perception of reality. Michael had never told me he was worried about my health. In fact, for weeks we had barely spoken beyond superficial greetings when he came home. But when he arrived that afternoon and saw the reorganized pantry, he smiled at Linda as if she had performed a miracle. "How wonderful, honey. Mom needed someone to help her with these things." "I didn't need help," I murmured, but nobody listened to me. I had already ceased to exist as a valid voice in family conversations. I had become the subject of conversation, not a participant. They spoke about me in my presence as if I were a piece of furniture that required occasional maintenance. The dinners became exercises in silent humiliation. Linda had completely assumed control of my kitchen, preparing meals that she considered more appropriate for the age of the family. My traditional dishes, perfected over decades, were replaced by tasteless salads and steamed fish without seasoning. Salt is very bad for blood pressure, she explained, while serving tiny portions that left everyone hungry. My husband, who had always praised my cooking with genuine enthusiasm, now ate in silence, and afterward told Linda how refreshing it was to try healthier food. Daniel tried to maintain normal conversations, but even he seemed uncomfortable with the new family dynamic. His visits became shorter and less frequent. "You don't like coming home anymore?" I asked him one day when he said goodbye after barely an hour. My youngest son looked at me with sad eyes that broke my heart. "Mom, it's just that everything is very different now. Linda is very intense." It was the first time someone in the family admitted that something was wrong, but even Daniel seemed resigned to accept the new reality. The weekends, which used to be my sacred refuge, turned into my weekly nightmare. Linda arrived on Saturday morning with detailed plans to improve some aspect of the house. Michael accompanied her carrying boxes of new decorations or paint samples she had chosen without consulting me. "Surprise, mother-in-law," she announced. "We're going to renovate the living room this weekend." My furniture, which had history and associated memories, was labeled as outdated and depressing. The sofa where I had nursed my children, where my husband fell asleep watching television, where we had shared thousands of intimate conversations, was replaced by a modern beige set that looked like it came from a medical waiting room. "Don't you feel younger with these changes?" Linda asked me while admiring her work. But I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every familiar object that disappeared took a piece of my identity, of my history, of the woman I had been for 70 years. The family photos were reorganized too. The images of my wedding, of my children's first steps, of family vacations that had been proudly displayed for decades, were relegated to boxes or replaced by professional photographs of Michael and Linda. "Old photos make the house look sad," my daughter-in-law explained. "It is better to have more current and cheerful images." My husband observed these changes with growing approval. "The house looks more modern," he commented. "Linda has a very good eye for decoration." I wanted to scream at him that it wasn't about decoration, but about erasing our family history, but the words stayed trapped in my throat like stones. The nights became especially lonely. My husband fell asleep early, exhausted by work and apparently satisfied with the new version of our home. I walked through the house like a ghost, recognizing fewer things every day. The familiar sounds had changed too. Instead of the comforting tick-tock of the pendulum clock that had belonged to my mother, now a digital clock beeped, which Linda had installed because it was more precise. The smells of my home had also disappeared. It no longer smelled of my favorite spices, of my fresh garden flowers cut every morning, of the scented candles I lit in the afternoons. Now everything smelled of industrial cleaning products and artificial air fresheners that Linda considered more hygienic. During meals, conversations revolved exclusively around Linda's plans for the next improvement of the house. Michael participated with enthusiasm, suggesting additional modifications and praising every idea of his wife. I sat in silence, chewing food that had no flavor, at a table I no longer recognized as mine, surrounded by people who claimed to love me, but who had decided that I was no longer capable of making decisions about my own life. "What do you think, mother-in-law?" Linda asked me occasionally, but it was obvious that my opinion was irrelevant. If I expressed any reservation or different suggestion, Michael immediately intervened to explain why Linda's idea was superior. "Mom, you have to trust us. We know what is best for you." One afternoon in March, while I was sitting in my garden trying to find a moment of peace among the roses that still belonged to me, the phone rang. It was Sarah, a former colleague from my days as a secretary at an accounting firm more than 20 years ago. Her voice sounded excited and full of energy, a marked contrast to the oppressive atmosphere that had invaded my home. "Emily, dear, I have an incredible proposal for you," she told me without preamble. "Do you remember Mrs. Susan Higgins, the one who lived in the building where I worked? Her daughter lives in Costa Rica now and is looking for someone trustworthy to take care of her mother. The job includes housing, an excellent salary, and Susan is a lovely woman. I thought of you immediately. For a moment, I felt as if someone had opened a window in a room closed for months. The possibility of getting out of my own house, of finding a purpose again, of being necessary and valued by someone, filled me with a hope I had forgotten existed. In Costa Rica? I asked, feeling my heart beat faster. For how long? At least a year, maybe more if things work out well, Sarah explained. Susan is 85 years old, but she is very lucid. She just needs company and someone to help her with basic tasks. Her daughter says she prefers a mature woman with life experience. The salary is $1,000 a month, plus all expenses paid. Emily, it is a perfect opportunity for you. $1,000 a month. It was more money than I had handled personally in decades. My husband had always controlled the family finances, giving me a weekly amount for household expenses. The idea of having my own money, of making my own decisions, felt as strange as it was exciting. I don't know, Sarah, I told her, although every fiber of my being screamed to say yes. I would have to discuss it with my family. I can't simply leave and leave my husband alone. But even while I pronounced those words, I wondered if anyone would really notice my absence. Hadn't Linda proven perfectly capable of handling every aspect of my household? Think about it carefully, dear, Sarah told me before hanging up. The opportunity won't last forever. Susan needs an answer before the weekend. When I hung up the phone, I sat in the garden for hours, imagining what it would be like to live in another country, to care for someone who really needed my services, to have meaningful conversations with a person who valued my experience instead of considering it obsolete. That night, during dinner, I gathered the courage to mention Sarah's call. A friend offered me a job in Costa Rica, I said casually, while Linda served her usual bland fish. Taking care of an elderly lady. The salary is very good and includes housing. The silence that followed was so dense it could have been cut with a knife. Michael was the first to react, letting out a dry laugh that froze my blood. A job? Mom, you are 70 years old. You are no longer at working age. His tone was the same he would use to scold a child who had said something ridiculous. Besides, your place is here, with the family. It is just an idea, I murmured, feeling immediately stupid for having mentioned the subject. But something inside me refused to give up completely. It could be an interesting experience. I haven't traveled anywhere for years. Linda exchanged a significant look with Michael before speaking. Mother-in-law, I wouldn't want to be rude, but do you really think you are qualified to care for another person? Lately, you have been very absent-minded. Wouldn't it be more sensible for you to stay here where we can take care of you? The word absent-minded hit me like a slap. I wasn't absent-minded, I was being systematically marginalized from my own life. Your mother is not absent-minded, my husband intervened, and for a moment I thought he was going to defend me. But Linda is right. It makes no sense for you to go to another country at your age. Here you are safe and well cared for. Well cared for? As if I were a pet, or a plant that needed occasional watering. Besides, Michael continued, what would Dad do without you? He cannot stay alone in this house. It was ironic that now they worried about my husband's ability to care for himself when for months they had acted as if I were completely dispensable for the functioning of the household. We could hire someone to come during the day, I suggested weakly, or Linda could. But Linda interrupted me before I could finish the sentence. Oh, mother-in-law, I have my job and my own responsibilities. I cannot be here 24 hours caring for two elderly people. Two elderly people. As if Michael and Daniel were helpless orphans instead of adult men perfectly capable of caring for their father. Daniel, who had remained silent during the whole conversation, finally spoke. Mom, if you really want to travel, we could plan a family vacation. But going alone to another country, it doesn't seem like a good idea. Even my youngest son, who had always been my ally, now joined the chorus of voices treating me like a senile old woman, incapable of making rational decisions. It was just an idea, I repeated, feeling the last spark of hope I had felt in months fade away. It is not important. But I knew I was lying. It was very important. It was the difference between continuing to slowly disappear in my own house or recovering some of my lost identity. The following days were especially difficult. Every time I thought about the opportunity I had rejected, I felt a mixture of regret and resentment gnawing at me inside. Sarah called me on Friday to tell me that Susan had found someone else, a 60-year-old woman from Guatemala who had accepted immediately. "She was perfect for you, Emily," she told me with sadness in her voice. "I hope another opportunity appears soon." But I knew there wouldn't be another opportunity. My family had made it very clear that my role was to stay at home, invisible and silent, while they decided what was best for my life. The idea of rebelling, of taking an independent decision, seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. Linda, apparently feeling she had won a significant victory, intensified her efforts to completely remodel my domestic identity. "Now that we know you are going to stay with us forever," she told me with that fake smile, "we can make long-term plans for your comfort." Her comfort meant more changes, more loss of control, more erasure of the woman I had been. That night, lying next to my husband, who snored peacefully, I wondered when I had stopped being Emily, the woman with dreams and opinions of her own, to become mom, mother-in-law, the missus, a series of roles defined by my relationship with other people. When had I accepted that my value as a human being depended exclusively on my usefulness to others? And most painful of all, why had I allowed it to happen? The moment that would change everything forever arrived 3 weeks later, on an April afternoon that began like any other. My husband had worsened from a flu he had had for several days, and the doctor had suggested we take him to the hospital for more detailed studies. The appointment was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon, and I had spent the morning preparing everything necessary: his medications, the health insurance documents, a change of clothes in case they decided to admit him. "Michael will come to pick us up at 1:30, I told my husband while he rested in bed. During the last few weeks, I had delegated these responsibilities to our eldest son, who had insisted he would handle all medical issues because hospitals can be confusing for elderly people. I had accepted this new dynamic with the resignation that had characterized all my recent months. At 1:15, my husband was already dressed and sitting in the living room waiting. I had his bag ready, and I had called Michael twice to confirm he was on his way. "I'm leaving the office now, Mom," he had told me on the second call. "I'll arrive in 15 minutes maximum." Linda had promised to meet us directly at the hospital after finishing an important meeting at her work. 1:30 arrived and passed without signs of Michael. My husband began to show signs of impatience, coughing more frequently and asking every few minutes what time it was. At 1:45, I called Michael again. The phone rang several times before he answered with a rushed voice. "Mom, an emergency came up at the office. A very important client arrived without warning. I can't leave now." "But Dad's appointment is at 2, I reminded him, feeling a pang of panic in my stomach. The doctor was very clear about the importance of not missing it. My husband watched me from the sofa with a worried expression, clearly listening to my side of the conversation. I know, Michael said with an impatient tone. "But this client could mean the biggest contract of the year for the company. I can't let him go. Linda will meet you at the hospital, okay? She can handle talking to the doctors." And he hung up before I could respond. I called Linda immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times during the next 10 minutes, with the same result. My husband had started to get nervous, insisting that he couldn't miss this appointment because the doctor had been very specific about the urgency of the studies. "We are going by taxi," I decided finally, although the idea terrified me. I hadn't handled complicated medical situations alone for years, and my husband depended completely on me to navigate the complex hospital system. but I had no other option. I called a cab company and they told me they would arrive in 20 minutes. When we finally arrived at the hospital, we were already half an hour late. The receptionist informed us that we would have to wait until there was a cancellation because they had given our slot to another patient. My husband looked weaker and weaker, and I felt completely lost trying to navigate the forms and procedures that Linda had promised to handle. We spent 4 hours in the waiting room. I called Michael 6 times. All went straight to voicemail. Linda didn't answer her messages either. We were completely alone. 2 elderly people lost in a medical system that seemed designed to confuse and frustrate seniors. When they finally saw my husband, the doctor was clearly annoyed by the delay and had to rush the exam. "You need to return tomorrow to complete the studies," the doctor told us with a serious expression. "Today we couldn't do everything necessary due to the lost time." My husband looked exhausted and confused, asking me repeatedly why Michael and Linda hadn't come as they had promised. The taxi ride back home was silent and painful. My husband coughed constantly, and I felt a mixture of anger and despair that was difficult to control. When we arrived home at 7 in the evening, we found Michael and Linda sitting comfortably in the living room, watching television and eating pizza they had ordered for delivery. "How did it go at the hospital?" Linda asked with a casual tone, as if she had completely forgotten she was supposed to meet us there. "We hope everything went well." The naturalness with which she pronounced those words left me speechless for several seconds. "You abandoned us," I said finally with a trembling voice. "You promised to accompany us and left us alone." Dad had to wait 4 hours and they couldn't complete all the studies. Michael didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Mom, I already explained to you that an emergency came up," he responded with a defensive tone. "And Linda had that super important meeting she couldn't cancel. Things happen. The important thing is that you got to the hospital," as if the fact that we had arrived by our own means was sufficient to absolve their abandonment. "The important thing," I repeated slowly, "is that your father needed support, and you weren't there." My voice had become firmer, fueled by hours of accumulated frustration. "You promised to be there, and you lied." It was the first time in months I directly confronted Michael about his behavior. Linda stood up from the sofa with an offended expression. "Mother-in-law, I think you are being very dramatic. You are adults capable of handling a medical appointment. You don't need us to hold your hand like little children." Her words were like a slap, especially because I knew she had a point. We had managed to handle the situation alone, although with great difficulty. "The point isn't whether we can do it alone," I explained, feeling tears of frustration gathering in my eyes. "The point is that you promised to help and didn't follow through, that when we needed you most, you decided other things were more important." My husband remained silent, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation but too tired to intervene. Michael stood up and approached me with that paternal expression he had adopted lately. "Mom, I understand you are tired, but you can't expect us to drop our professional responsibilities every time you have a medical appointment. We have our own lives. Our own lives." As if his sick father and his exhausted mother were inconvenient obstacles to their personal plans. That night, lying in bed listening to my husband's labored breathing, something broke inside me permanently. It wasn't a dramatic break, but rather like when a rope wears down slowly until it finally snaps with the slightest weight. For months, I had accepted gradual marginalization, decisions made without consulting me, the loss of control over my own house. But the deliberate abandonment at the hospital had been different. It had been cruel. The next day, while Michael and Linda were at their jobs, I called Sarah. "Do you think Susan still needs someone?" I asked her without preamble. "The woman from Guatemala they hired." "She already started working." My friend was surprised by the call, but she explained that the Guatemalan woman had faced visa issues and hadn't been able to travel. "Actually," Sarah told me, "Susan asked me yesterday if I knew anyone else. Are you seriously considering the proposal?" The question hung in the air like an opportunity for redemption, like a door opening when I most needed to escape. Yes, I responded with a firmness that surprised me. I am very interested. When can I speak with Susan's daughter? For the first time in months, I felt I was making a decision that was completely mine, without consulting anyone, without asking permission from people who had clearly shown that my well-being was not their priority. The phone conversation with Susan's daughter, Helen, was like a ray of light after months of darkness. Her voice was warm and genuinely interested in knowing me as a person, not just as a potential employee. "My mother has spoken a lot about you, Mrs. Emily," she told me from San Jose. "Sarah told her about your experience caring for your own family, and that is exactly what Mom needs. Someone with real experience, not just certificates." Helen explained to me that Susan lived in a small but comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood of the Costa Rican capital. Mom is very independent for her age, but she needs company and someone to ensure she takes her medications. She also loves to cook, so it would be wonderful if you could share that activity. The idea of cooking again for someone who appreciated my work excited me in a way I hadn't felt in years. "When could I start?" Helen asked me. "We can handle all the visa and passport paperwork from here. I have contacts at the embassy who can speed up the process." Helen's efficiency and professionalism contrasted dramatically with the chaotic way my own family handled important responsibilities. "In 2 weeks?" I responded without hesitation. "I need to arrange some things here, but I will be ready to travel in 2 weeks." After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen, feeling for the first time like the master of my own destiny. I hadn't consulted anyone, hadn't asked permission, hadn't waited for approval. I had made a decision that was completely mine. The following days were a whirlwind of secret preparations. While Michael and Linda continued with their normal lives, assuming I would be available indefinitely to be remodeled according to their preferences, I discreetly organized the necessary documents for my new life. I took my passport out of the drawer where it had been kept for 10 years, updated my medical certificate, and began to separate my most important belongings. The hardest part was deciding what to take and what to leave behind. Every object in my house had associated memories, but I also realized that many of those memories had already been contaminated by the last months of humiliation. The apron I had used for years to cook family Sundays now reminded me of Linda's criticisms about my antiquated methods. The family photos that had been relegated to boxes seemed like relics of a happier time that no longer existed. I decided to take only the essentials: practical clothes, some books that had been important to me, the jewelry my mother had left me, and a single photograph of my sons when they were little, before they became the men who now treated me like a nuisance. Everything else could stay in the house that no longer felt like my home. On the Thursday of my second week of preparations, Helen called me with excellent news. "Everything is ready, Mrs. Emily. Your visa was approved and I have your plane ticket. The flight leaves on Saturday at 10 in the morning. Do you need someone to pick you up at the airport here?" The reality of my escape had materialized with a speed that left me breathless. "Yes, please," I told her, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded me of when I was young and life stretched out before me full of possibilities. "I will be there on Saturday." After hanging up, I sat on my bed and cried for the first time in months. Not tears of sadness, but of relief and anticipation. Friday night, I decided it was time to inform my family about my decision. I had considered simply leaving without saying anything, but my upbringing and principles prevented me from disappearing without explanation. During dinner, which consisted of another one of Linda's tasteless creations, I took a deep breath and announced my news. "Tomorrow I am going to Costa Rica," I said with a steady voice. "I got the caregiver job I mentioned weeks ago. My flight leaves at 10 in the morning." The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the beep of the digital clock Linda had installed. Michael was the first to react, letting out that dry laugh I had learned to hate. "Mom, what are you talking about? We already discussed this. You can't go alone to another country at your age." His tone was condescending, as if he were scolding a child who had proposed something absurd. "I am not asking for permission," I responded with a calmness that surprised me. I am informing you about a decision I have already made. The documents are ready, the ticket is bought, and the job is confirmed." My husband looked at me with a mixture of shock and confusion, clearly not fully processing what was happening. Linda dropped her fork onto the plate with a metallic clatter. "Mother-in-law, this is ridiculous. You cannot abandon your husband to go care for a stranger. What will people think?" The concern for social appearances was typical of Linda, who was always obsessed with maintaining a perfect image. "People will think that a 70-year-old woman decided to have purpose and dignity instead of being treated like a piece of furniture in her own house," I responded, feeling a strength in my voice that hadn't been there for months. "And my husband is perfectly capable of caring for himself, especially with all the help you have been so anxious to provide." My husband finally found his voice. "Emily, I don't understand. Why do you want to leave? Are you not happy here with us?" The question was so naive it broke my heart. How could I explain to him that for months I hadn't been happy, that I had been systematically excluded from all decisions about my own life, that I had become a stranger in my own home? "I haven't been happy for a long time," I told him gently, "but you all have been too busy reorganizing my life to notice." Daniel, who had remained silent, looked genuinely disturbed by the revelation. "Mom, if you weren't happy, you should have told us," murmured my youngest son. "We could have talked, found a solution." But I knew it was too late for conversations. The months of marginalization had been a constant conversation that they had chosen not to hear. Michael stood up from the table with a furious expression. "This is total madness. I am not going to allow my 70-year-old mother to go alone to a foreign country to work as a domestic servant. It is humiliating for the whole family." The word "allow" resonated in my ears like an alarm bell. "You don't need to allow anything," I responded, standing up as well. "I am an adult woman who has made a decision about her own life. For 70 years, I have done what others expected of me. For the first time, I am going to do what I want to do." The strength of my conviction seemed to have taken everyone by surprise, including myself. Linda tried one last manipulative argument. "Mother-in-law, if you leave now, what guarantee do we have that you will return? Your husband needs you. We need you." But I was no longer susceptible to the guilt they had used so effectively for months. "If you needed me," I said, heading towards my room, "then you should have demonstrated that need by treating me with respect and consideration instead of like an inconvenient burden." I went up the stairs with more energy than I had felt in years, leaving behind a table full of people who finally understood they could no longer control me. Saturday morning arrived with a crystal clarity that seemed to reflect my mental state. I woke up at 5, as I had done for decades, but this time it wasn't to prepare my husband's breakfast. It was to finish packing my life into 2 suitcases and begin the journey toward my new existence. The house was in total silence. Nobody had come down to say goodbye or try a last effort to dissuade me. While I waited for the taxi that would take me to the airport, I sat in the living room I no longer recognized as mine and reflected on the night before. After my announcement during dinner, my husband had gone directly up to the bedroom without saying another word. Michael and Linda had stayed in the kitchen, whispering furiously, probably planning strategies to make me change my mind. Daniel had knocked on my bedroom door around 10, but I had pretended to be asleep. The sound of the taxi horn broke the morning silence. I took my suitcases, took one last look at the house where I had lived for 25 years, and walked out the front door without looking back. There were no dramatic goodbyes, no tears on the threshold, no last-minute pleas, only the sound of the door closing behind me, marking the end of a stage of my life and the beginning of another completely unknown one. The flight to San Jose was my first experience traveling alone in decades. At first, I felt nervous and disoriented, but gradually I began to enjoy the freedom of making my own decisions without consulting anyone. I ordered the breakfast I wanted, chose the magazine that interested me, and for the first time in months, nobody suggested a more appropriate option for my age. Helen was waiting for me at the airport with a sign that said, Mrs. Emily, and a genuinely warm smile. She was a woman of about 40, professional but accessible, who immediately made me feel welcome. "What a pleasure to finally meet you," she told me while loading one of my suitcases. "Mom is very excited to have you at home. She's been preparing your room all week." The trip from the airport to Susan's house was revealing. San Jose was a vibrant and colorful city full of life and energy that contrasted sharply with the oppressive atmosphere I had left behind. Helen pointed out interesting places during the ride, explaining about local markets, nearby parks, and activities that Susan enjoyed. "Mom loves walking through the Central Park on Tuesdays and Thursdays," she told me. "She says she likes to watch people and feed the pigeons." Susan's house was exactly as Helen had described it to me. Small but comfortable, with a garden full of tropical plants and a terrace where you could drink coffee in the mornings. Susan received me at the door with open arms and a smile that lit up her entire wrinkled face. "Emily, dear," she exclaimed, "how happy I am that you have come to keep this lonely old woman company." From the first moment, the difference was astounding. Susan treated me like a valuable guest, not like an employee. She showed me the house with pride, explaining the history behind every photograph and every decorative object. "This was my room for 50 years, she told me, pointing to the master bedroom, "but now I prefer the smaller room because it gets better sun in the mornings. The big room is yours now, with a private bathroom and a view of the garden. My new room was bright and cozy, decorated with soft colors that invited rest. It had a comfortable bed, a desk by the window, and a spacious closet where I could arrange my few belongings. For the first time in months, I had a space that was completely mine, where nobody would enter to reorganize my things or suggest improvements. The first weeks in Costa Rica were like waking up from a long and confusing dream. Susan turned out to be delightful company, intelligent, funny, and full of fascinating stories about her life. She had been a teacher for 40 years, had traveled all over Central America, and had interesting opinions on everything, from politics to gardening. Our conversations during meals were stimulating and respectful, something I had forgotten was possible. The daily routine was simple, but satisfying. Susan woke up early like me, and we had breakfast together on the terrace while planning the day. I was in charge of ensuring she took her medications, but she was perfectly capable of handling most of her daily activities. We cooked together, explored the neighborhood, and in the afternoons she taught me about the plants in her garden, while I told her stories of my previous life. "Do you know what I like most about having you here?" Susan asked me one afternoon while we watered the orchids. "That you treat me like a whole person, not like a fragile old woman who needs constant protection." Her words resonated deeply within me because they described exactly what I had lost in my house: basic respect toward my complete humanity. During my second month in Costa Rica, I began to notice changes in myself that I hadn't experienced in years. My posture had straightened, my voice had recovered its natural strength, and for the first time in a long time, I looked in the mirror and recognized the woman I saw reflected. Susan had encouraged me to buy new clothes, and together we had chosen colorful dresses that made me feel feminine and vital. It was during this period of personal rediscovery that I met Robert. He was a 73-year-old widower who lived in the same neighborhood and visited Susan occasionally because they had been colleagues during their teaching years. Robert was an authentic gentleman, educated, gentle, and with a sense of humor that made me laugh in ways I had forgotten existed. "Robert is interested in you," Susan told me with a mischievous smile after one of his visits. "And I think the feeling is mutual. The idea of romance at my age seemed at the same time exciting and terrifying. For 45 years, I had been married to the same man, and the possibility of exploring new romantic feelings felt like completely unknown territory. Robert began inviting me to walk in the park on Sundays. Our walks were slow and quiet, full of conversations about books, travels, and dreams that both of us had put aside during our previous marriages. He treated me with a courtesy and consideration that reminded me how a woman was supposed to feel when she was valued and respected by a man. My late wife used to say that it is never too late to be happy, Robert confided in me during one of our walks. I think she was right. Life doesn't end at 70. Sometimes it simply begins again. His words captured perfectly what I was experiencing. Not the end of my life, but a new chapter full of possibilities I hadn't considered before. While my new life in Costa Rica flourished, my phone began to ring with increasing frequency. Michael called weekly, at first with an angry and demanding tone. "Mom, this joke has lasted long enough. It is time for you to return home where you belong." But gradually, his calls became more desperate. "Dad misses you a lot. The house isn't the same without you." Daniel also called with a different approach. "Mom, I understand you needed a break, but now that you've had your adventure, don't you think it is time to come back?" His words bothered me deeply because they reduced my personal transformation to a simple, temporary adventure. But the most revealing calls came from my husband. His voice sounded lost and confused, as if he had finally realized everything I had been silently handling for years. "Emily, I don't understand how things work in the house. Linda comes to help, but it is not the same. The food doesn't taste the same. The house feels empty. Please come home." During my phone conversations with my family, I had developed a new perspective that allowed me to respond with calm and clarity instead of the guilt and anxiety that had characterized my previous reactions. "I am not coming back," I told Michael during one of his most insistent calls. "I have found a life that gives me purpose and respect, and I am not going to give that up to become invisible in my own house again." "But Mom," Michael insisted with that voice he used when he believed he was being reasonable. "Here you have a family that needs you. Over there you only have a stranger who pays you to take care of her." His words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to be valued. Susan didn't pay me simply to care for her. She respected me as an equal partner, consulted my opinions, and valued my life experience. "Susan is not a stranger," I explained patiently. "She's a friend who treats me with dignity. And you didn't need me when I was there. You only needed me to keep quiet while you reorganized my life according to your preferences." The silence that followed told me that Michael was finally beginning to understand the gravity of how they had treated me. Linda's calls were particularly revealing. She had adopted a falsely concerned tone that fooled no one. "Mother-in-law, we know you are going through a crisis, but abandoning your family is not the solution. Your husband is suffering a lot without you." The irony was astounding. The same woman who had spent months trying to make me invisible now accused me of abandonment for seeking my own happiness. My husband suffered for months watching me be marginalized and did nothing to defend me. I responded with a firmness that clearly surprised her. If he is suffering now, maybe he understands how I felt during all that time. Linda tried to argue, but I had learned not to engage in debates that only served to drain my energy. The hardest call came from my husband after 3 months of my departure. His voice sounded broken and aged in a way that broke my heart. "Emily, I have been thinking a lot about what you said before leaving. I think I didn't realize what was happening. Linda says she was only trying to help, but now I see that maybe we went too far." It was the closest admission to an apology I had heard from any member of my family, but it arrived too late and was too tentative. "I appreciate you recognizing that," I told him gently, "but the damage is already done. I have built a new life here, and, for the first time in years, I am genuinely happy. I am not going to give up that happiness to return to a situation that made me miserable. But we can change things," he insisted with desperation. "We can talk to Michael and Linda, set different boundaries. You can have more control over the house." His promises sounded sincere, but I knew that fundamental changes in personality and attitude don't happen simply because someone leaves for a few months. During my 4th month in Costa Rica, I received an unexpected call that would change everything again. It was Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer, with news that left me completely speechless. "Mrs. Emily, I need to speak with you about your husband's will." There are some additional documents that appeared during the review of his personal files. Additional documents? I asked, confused. I thought everything had been settled during the reading of the will. Mr. Henderson explained that he had found a safe in my husband's office containing papers that significantly modified the testamentary provisions we had heard months ago. Your husband maintained bank accounts abroad that were not included in the original will, the lawyer explained. Apparently, these accounts were specifically designated for you, with very detailed instructions on when and how they should be revealed. My heart began to beat faster as I processed the implications of this information. What kind of accounts? I asked, although part of me already suspected that this revelation would have dramatic consequences for my whole family. Mr. Henderson explained to me that my husband had been systematically transferring money to offshore accounts during the last 15 years, accumulating a considerable fortune he had kept completely secret. The total amount is approximately $80 million, Mr. Henderson said, and I had to sit down because my legs trembled. The instructions specify that this information was only to be revealed if you were treated disrespectfully during the reading of the initial will. Your husband apparently anticipated that his children might show their true character if they believed you had inherited very little. The irony of the situation was so perfect, it almost seemed too good to be true. My husband, who had remained silent while Michael and Linda marginalized me, had been secretly preparing a test to evaluate the character of our children. The $50 had been a decoy, designed to reveal exactly the type of people they had become. Do the boys know about this? I asked, although the answer was obvious. Mr. Henderson confirmed that Michael and Daniel had no idea of the existence of these additional accounts. According to my husband's instructions, I was the sole beneficiary of this hidden fortune, and I had complete discretion over whether to reveal its existence to the rest of the family. That night, sitting on Susan's terrace under the tropical stars, I reflected on this extraordinary revelation. My husband, despite his failures during the last months of his life, had proven to know me better than I had thought. He had predicted that I would need resources to rebuild my life if our children turned out to be the selfish people they seemed to have become. Susan, whom I told about the lawyer's call, offered me a wise perspective that can only come from someone who has lived 85 years. Emily, dear, money is only a tool. The important thing is that you have the freedom to choose how to use it. Your husband gave you a gift much more valuable than money. He gave you proof that you were right about what was happening in your family. The question now was what to do with this information. Could I return home as a rich and powerful woman, capable of putting Michael and Linda in their place definitively? Or could I continue building my new life in Costa Rica, using the resources to secure my independence and perhaps help others who found themselves in situations similar to mine? Robert, who had been visiting more frequently and whose friendship had deepened to become something we both recognized as mature and respectful love, offered me a different perspective. Emily, you have shown that you don't need money to be strong and independent. You already did the hardest part. You rescued yourself. Now you have the opportunity to decide what kind of life you want to build with this new freedom. His words captured exactly what I was feeling. The unexpected wealth was less important than the emotional and spiritual wealth I had discovered in Costa Rica. I had learned that I could be self-sufficient, that I could form new relationships based on mutual respect, and that it was never too late to start over. After a week of deep reflection and long conversations with Susan and Robert, I made the decision to return briefly to my hometown for the second reading of the will. Not because I wanted to return to my previous life, but because I felt I deserved to see the faces of Michael and Linda when they learned the whole truth. It was a way to close the circle, to confront the people who had underestimated me so cruelly. Mr. Henderson had organized the meeting for a Tuesday morning in his office. I arrived 15 minutes before the agreed time, wearing an elegant purple dress I had bought in San Jose that made me feel powerful and sure of myself. When Michael and Linda entered the boardroom, their expressions of surprise at seeing me were immediately replaced by fake smiles and condescending comments. "Mom, how good that you decided to return," Michael said with that paternal voice I had come to detest so much. "We hope you have already overcome your crisis and are ready to return home where you belong." Linda nodded enthusiastically, clearly relieved that her troublesome mother-in-law had returned to be managed again according to her preferences. "I haven't come back to stay," I clarified immediately. "I am here because the lawyer informed me about additional documents related to my husband's will." Daniel, who had arrived a few minutes later, looked genuinely confused by the whole situation. Mr. Henderson began the reading with the same professional seriousness that had characterized the first session months ago. Before proceeding with the additional documents, I must explain the context behind the original testamentary provisions. The gentleman had left specific instructions on when to reveal the complete information about his estate. "Complete information?" Michael asked with a mocking smile. Did Dad have more money hidden somewhere? Another $50 for Mom? His laugh was cut short abruptly when Mr. Henderson explained the true nature of the inheritance I was about to receive. "During the last 15 years, your father maintained offshore bank accounts that accumulated a total of 80 million American dollars, the lawyer announced. These accounts were established exclusively for Mrs. Emily, with specific instructions that they would only be revealed if she was treated disrespectfully during the reading of the initial will." The silence that followed was so complete and prolonged that the hum of the air conditioner could be heard. Michael opened and closed his mouth several times without emitting any sound. Linda had turned completely pale, her hands trembling visibly on the table. Daniel looked at me with an expression of absolute shock mixed with something that looked like genuine shame. 80 million, Michael repeated finally, his voice barely a whisper. $80 million. Mr. Henderson confirmed the figure and proceeded to explain the legal mechanisms that would transfer complete control of these accounts to my name within the next 48 hours. Linda was the first to recover the ability to speak, although her voice sounded strangled and desperate. "But that is not fair. We are the children. We are the ones who have been taking care of the family business. Why does she receive all the money?" Her indignation was so perfect, so predictable, that it almost made me smile. "Why?" I said, rising slowly from my chair. "My husband knew exactly what kind of people you were. He knew that if you believed I had received only $50, you would show your true character. And you did, magnificently." My voice was firm and clear, without a trace of the timidity that had characterized my interactions with them for months. Michael tried to regain control of the situation. "Mom, obviously there were misunderstandings. We can fix things. We can divide the money equally among the whole family." The desperation in his voice was palpable, and for the first time in my life, I saw my eldest son as he really was, a greedy man willing to say anything to get what he wanted. "There's nothing to fix," I responded calmly. "For months you treated me like a nuisance, like a senile old woman who needed to be managed and controlled. You reorganized my house, criticized my food, abandoned me when I needed you most, and laughed when you thought my husband had left me practically nothing. That behavior revealed who you really are." Daniel finally found his voice, and there were genuine tears in his eyes. "Mom, I never wanted you to feel that way. I know I stayed silent when I should have defended you. I know I failed as a son." His regret seemed sincere, but it arrived too late to change the damage that had been done. "I appreciate your honesty, Daniel," I told him gently. "But silence when an injustice is committed is complicity. You had multiple opportunities to speak, and you chose the comfort of silence." The words clearly hurt him, but it was important that he understood the consequences of his decisions. Linda had started to cry, but her tears seemed to me more of frustration than genuine regret. "Mother-in-law, I always tried to help you. Everything I did was for your own good, to modernize your life, to make it more comfortable. Linda's capacity for self-deception was truly astounding. What you did, I explained patiently, was invade my home, marginalize my voice, and try to erase my identity to replace it with your version of what a woman my age should be. That was not help, it was colonization. Mr. Henderson observed the exchange with a professionally neutral expression, but I could see a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Michael made one last desperate attempt. Mom, we are family. Families overcome misunderstandings. We can start over, do things differently. But I had learned that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired simply with words and promises. You had the opportunity to treat me like family when I was vulnerable and dependent, I responded. You chose to treat me like a burden. Now that I am independent and financially powerful, you want to renegotiate the terms. But relationships don't work like that. After signing all the necessary documents and confirming that the bank transfers were in process, I headed toward the door of Mr. Ayis Henderson's office. Daniel followed me into the hallway. Mom, is there any possibility that we can rebuild our relationship? Not for the money, but because I really understand that I failed you. I stopped and looked him in the eyes, seeing for the first time in months a genuine vulnerability in my youngest son. Daniel, forgiveness is possible, but trust is rebuilt with actions, not words. If you really want a relationship with me, you will have to prove that you have learned from this experience. And that will take time. I returned to Costa Rica with a feeling of closure I hadn't expected to experience. The confrontation had been necessary, not to hurt them, but to definitively close the chapter of my life where I had allowed others to define my value. Susan received me with a warm hug, and Robert with fresh flowers from the market. How do you feel? Susan asked me that night while we drank tea on the terrace. Was it what you expected? I reflected on her question before answering. The satisfaction had been less than I had anticipated, but the sense of completed justice was deep and healing. I feel free, I told her finally. For the first time in my life, I don't owe anyone explanations about my decisions. I can choose how to spend my time, my energy, and now my money based solely on what makes me happy and gives me purpose. With my new resources, I decided to establish a foundation to help older women who found themselves in situations similar to the one I had lived. Susan volunteered to help with the organization, and Robert suggested including emotional support programs in addition to financial assistance. 1 year after my initial escape, Robert and I decided to get married in a small and intimate ceremony in Susan's garden. Daniel was the only member of my family who came to the wedding after months of difficult but constructive conversations about how to rebuild our relationship. Michael and Linda were not invited. While I stood next to Robert exchanging vows at 71, I remembered the humiliation I had felt in that lawyer's office just 2 years ago. The woman who had been ridiculed for inheriting $50 no longer existed. In her place was a woman who had learned that true value is not measured in inherited money, but in the courage to rebuild your life when everyone expects you to give up. Sometimes, being abandoned by your children is the beginning of true freedom, I told Susan during my wedding speech. My story began with a humiliation at the reading of a will, but it ended with the discovery that it is never too late to write a new chapter of your life.